All right, everybody. I hope everybody has their food now. As I said, the worst job I have to do today is stop conversations. I apologize. We do have a coffee break this afternoon and a reception at 5. Having the kids here, I've talked to everybody, has been so fantastic. The one downside is there's no alcohol at the reception, I'm sorry. Stanford has rules, and it goes back to our old dry days when Stanford was a dry campus, so we'll survive. But please keep these conversations going. I'm really glad that we see people have moved around and are sitting at tables where they don't know other people, so that's great. I'm really thrilled and honored to be here doing a short fireside chat with Assistant Secretary DELPHIN-RITTMON. She and I have had some chances to talk earlier today, and I've already synced up and excited for today. So as I've mentioned before, one of the things I did last year was work on the National Academy of Sciences report on social media adolescence and well-being. And in that, we have a series of recommendations, some around standards that David was talking about earlier during our workshop session there. But we also had one recommendation for the agency that the Assistant Secretary heads up. So we argued in that the SAMHSA should support programs for children and adolescents that experience digital abuse. So it's a little bit less about like what can we do with tech, et cetera, but actually dealing with once the kids have experienced something like sexual exploitation, for example, what can SAMHSA do, and how should we be thinking about supporting kids that have already suffered some kind of harm?
Yeah, and so appreciate that question. I mean, one of the things, is this on? Yes, it is. So one of the things that we're working on that we have in place, and we're so grateful for this partnership, is our Center of Excellence on social media and emotional well-being for young folks. And it really is focused on, and actually we do have a representative here, Megan Moreno from the Center of Excellence from the American Academy of Pediatrics. The thing that we're...
And Jenny.
Oh, and Jen, actually we have a number of folks here. So that is wonderful. It's a great team, and so, you know, they have been really actively working on developing a range of resources for young people, for family members, for community members, around just the range of experiences that young people may have online, to include sort of how to navigate and how to work through either bullying or other negative experiences that may have already happened. All the way to sort of, even if we back up from that, developing sort of social media plans, if you will, for families. The one thing I love about that tool is it creates the opportunity for families to sort of come together and to really have that conversation around sort of what will make a difference for us as a family in terms of social media, what will help to help us to think about social media holistically as a family and develop either, for example, media-free zones or times, or sort of strategies that will work sort of family-wide. And so that's one resource. It's really, really helpful. One other that I'd like to mention, and again, just so appreciate the work that the Center of Excellence is doing, is there is an online portal. So family members or even young folks can submit questions to the portal around some of their experiences. And so it may be a sort of a question around how do I work with my young person or my child who has experienced this instance of bullying or sexploitation, or and then they'll get responses fairly immediately from professionals in the field around how to navigate those situations as well as others. There's quite a bit of uptake around that already. For both in terms of the questions that can be submitted, but also even in terms of, you know, developing the family media plans. And so those are just two resources that I wanted to share that are things that we're doing. Certainly other areas of work that that we're working on will come out of the task force. I'm really grateful for the work of the task force and for the collaboration with Assistant Secretary Davidson and his team, because I think this is an opportunity really to think, you know, appreciate the comments earlier, in a nuanced way around what's going to make a difference from a health perspective, from a privacy perspective, from a security perspective, you know, all the areas that we talked about in terms of making some meaningful impacts in these critical areas. So.
Yeah, it really feels like parents and kids, we're all at this sort of bleeding edge of what's happening, and so a lot of parents will come up to me and say, hey, this just happened to my kid, what do I do? And that's not just parents, it's teachers, you know, educators, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's a space that we're all really navigating through together. I can't count the number of conversations I've had with friends or even my own family members around sort of some of the challenges with social media. And I think certainly some of what we've been trying to do is have resources there at fingertips for family members and others to be able to navigate these various instances which may come up. Right. And then if anything reaches a crisis point, if a family member or others feels that whatever they're experiencing related to social media, that it's become a crisis point, of course, there's the 988 Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and that is for folks not only who are experiencing a suicide-related crisis, but any other type of mental health or substance use crisis. And so I think that is an additional tool that families and even young folks should know about. A person can call, text, or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I think that's a nice adjunct for those situations that really become more intense and is more of a crisis situation.
Yeah, completely agree. So important to have that resource. One of the things from our research that I think is emerging over the last few years that I wanted to ask you about in terms of making policy, this is a hard one, is heterogeneity. This is the term that we've used to talk about the ways that it doesn't seem to be one impact on everybody. And also, I think it's as some of the people mentioned in the morning that, what's going on with a 13-year-old is going to be really different than a 16 and then a 19-year-old. Yeah. So how do you think about that sort of heterogeneity that the research is showing, that for some kids it can be great, for some kids it can be really problematic, and other kids, most kids maybe at that time it doesn't really affect their well-being? How are you thinking about that heterogeneity as you think about policy?
Yeah. Well, for one, I think it's something that an area where we know that we need more research. We need to better understand the impacts of social media at different points in a young person's life. We know that, developmentally, a person's needs as well as their responses, how they take in information, even how they process the information is going to vary based on their age. So there's huge heterogeneity really just based on age. But we know there's also heterogeneity based on people. That's a hard word to say. Can't say that one.
I practiced all morning.
Can't say that one 10 times. But we know there's a significant amount of variation. If we even look at other demographic characteristics or factors, we know that LGBTQ plus individuals, and there's intersectionality there as well. There may be, and I think important questions that we need to drill down further on to better understand people's nuanced experiences across the lifespan, but also across these different areas of intersectionality and what they may be experiencing online from a health perspective, from a privacy, from a safety, really the full the key areas of work that we've been talking about, or key areas of needed intervention that we've been talking about.
As you're working on the policy frameworks and thinking about it, how are you thinking about the role of parents and family? Mm-hmm. There's something here at Stanford we're starting to, I know once I say it, it's obvious the role that the family plays. Mm-hmm. And it feels like a lot of that has been missing from the federal policy because the focus is on platforms and mm-hmm. focuses on harms and enforcement, all those really important things. But what about the family?
Yeah. Well, I think the family can play a real role, and I appreciated the discussion of the first panel. The young folks that shared that parents and family members have a role to play as well. I think that's true. I think family members, parents, or caretakers or caregivers can do some important modeling for young folks, and I think we've seen at times you go out to a restaurant and everyone at the table is on their phone, the parents and the kids. And so I think there's modeling that can happen there. Not that that's a bad thing. Maybe part of the family plan was, okay, first 5 minutes we get so if that's a shared agreement, then that certainly works. I think it's really a personal and family decision. But nevertheless, I think family members and parents can do modeling around sort of safe and effective social media usage. I think they can also create spaces that are safe so that young folks can feel comfortable bringing up and having conversations around their experiences online. And so maybe even sharing some of their own experiences, either content or sites that they saw that didn't sit with them well. Having conversations like that can really help to keep the space open so that if a young person has an experience that is negative or off-putting, there already is sort of an entryway or an on-ramp, if you will, to have that conversation with an adult in their family. Yeah. And then the last thing I would say is I think it's important for family members and for parents just to seek out information there may be tools or best practices or the family plan that I mentioned that can help with having those conversations with young folks. And certainly some of what, as Sam said, we see our role is, developing some of those resources through the Social Media Center of Excellence. And again, we're so grateful for the amazing work that the team is doing. And others to be able to give family members and parents sort of content that they can work with, with their young person. So.
Yeah, this is great. One of the things that I love about what the center's doing and some of the work here is sort of pushing back against this idea of, well, just, don't let your kids use it or something like that, right? And I think it comes from a place of privilege where you assume like you can monitor that or do that, but if you're a single mom just, raising kids, to say that. So I guess one question I would have that I think the latest literature is sort of working on is how do we flip the narrative from, I think Sahil said it best, like from being victims to being empowered users that are more in control. How can we think about, emphasizing that?
Yeah. I mean, I think one, we often talk about this is, for one, like meeting folks where they're at. I think that is so important. We talk about that sort of across our work. And, the fact of the matter is I think people are on social media. About 95% of young folks have phones and, the smartphones are everywhere. So I think, meeting people where they're at, but then I think also inviting and really ensuring that young folks are part of the conversations. I mean, I loved the panel that we had this morning, talk about mic drop moments like all over the place. But it's critical that we get that information. I think it's critical that we have the voices of young folks at the table. Often within the mental health space, we hear nothing about us without us. We get reminded about that all the time, and thankfully that aligns with our vision of how we do the work and how we think about the work. I think this is a space where we have to think along those lines as well, inviting young people in to be able to offer recommendations and strategies and approaches around what will make a meaningful difference. And so I think that is one way that we can continue to sort of create a space that is both inclusive, but is also well and appropriately informed by the individuals that we're trying to develop strategies and approaches that are positive and impactful.
I'm going to make that your own mic drop. So thank you so much, Assistant Secretary. I'd like to invite Charlotte Wilner and Assistant Secretary Davidson to the fireside, which is here, and you can imagine. And again, thank you so much, Assistant Secretary.
Thank you.
Let's go get some food.
Yes.
This is such a cozy fireside,
cozy,
I have to
right?
say, yes.
Don't move too much, the camera's right on. Okay.
Okay, well, I've been told not to move too much, so here we go.
We will be,
captive
I'm sure that won't make us
audience,
stiff or
yes.
anything.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Wilner. I am the Executive Director of the Trust and Safety Professional Association and the Trust and Safety Foundation, two nonprofits supporting the practice and understanding of trust and safety. I am delighted to be here with Assistant Secretary Alan Davidson, who, among many other things, co-chairs the Biden-Harris administration's Task Force on Kids Online Health and Safety. I did it, and it's not on my business card, so it's long. Now, first question for you. You obviously described the task force in your opening remarks, and we just heard a little more about it. I will confess I am a born and raised Californian, and there's a few things about Washington that I'm not sure I understand. One is suits, and the other is task
The last place in America where people still wear a tie.
There we are, right? I've never had to do it. But if you could just tell us a little bit, and the live audience, a little about what can we expect a task force to achieve? How does this work?
Great question, and for the benefit of the folks listening online, a few words about our task force, appointed by the White House, with the task of advising the White House and the President on a couple of different things about how we make sure that we're protecting the mental health of young people online, but even more so thinking about how they can thrive online. And I underscore that because I think one thing that our group, and it's a very varied group from across the government, I think feels strongly about is this isn't just about making sure that people are protected. It's recognizing that young people are going to be online, that parents want young people, caregivers want young people to be online and using these new tools, and we need to make sure that they're thriving, they're succeeding. So we've got a very varied group from across the federal government. Some of the folks are here today. We've got colleagues from the Justice Department, the Department of Education, National Institute of Standards and Technology, the Surgeon General's Office, the Federal Trade Commission is involved as well, and all bring different capacities in the federal government to this problem of making sure that we can help children thrive online. We've been given 3 big tasks. One is to identify gaps in the research agenda and think about how we fill those gaps. A second is providing guidance to parents and caregivers about how they can help children thrive online. And then the last is thinking about best practices for industry. And that's part of what's brought us here today, is really that feeling that so much of this work is being done by technology companies, and that we're in a place where we need companies to step up more, and we need to hear from them more about what they're learning about the online environment. But maybe that's a good segue. You know, I mean, I'm very glad to be answering questions, but we actually have a real trust and safety professional here with us. So let me maybe turn the tables for a second and ask you to say a few words. What is this Trust and Safety Professionals Association? And
I'm glad you asked.
And also, what should policymakers understand about trust and safety professionals?
Absolutely. My association, obviously, we're a nonprofit. We represent thousands of people around the world who engage in the practice of trust and safety. That's everybody from vice presidents of lots of stuff at Meta to individual moderators doing a single Mastodon instance. So it's a really broad range of people all around the world. Trust and safety as a function, and I think it's important to call it a function in some ways. It's one of many functions within any business or any company, and our job is to design and support safe experiences. So there's like usually a growth team who needs to make the number go up, and there's the monetization team who they need to make a different number go up. We are responsible for making sure that people can be safe and understanding what safety means. I often say that trust and safety is abbreviated to TNS, and TNS also stands for trade-offs and sadness, because a lot of what our job actually is recognizing that as much as we wish there was this one clear answer and everyone should do it, usually there's a lot of complicated choices in front of us, and we have to know what those are and then communicate those to the rest of our company and to our users and to the public about here's what's available, and here are then the choices we can make. And that's what I think policymakers can expect in talking to a trust and safety professional, is we're there to talk about that nuance, which is a word we've been using a lot today.
What do you think when we were talking about this task that is before our task force? What are some of the kinds of things that you think, or kinds of interventions that we should be considering, or that kind of concrete suggestions for what we could be doing?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you a classic trust and safety answer, which is it depends. Earlier, we've actually heard from a panel, and then we did a workshop where we were talking about sort of the different types of interventions that are available and the evidence we have for those, or maybe not for those. One of the things I was really reflecting on after the panel was how many interventions we have that actually already exist, and we don't think about in a youth-specific lens. The youth panel was talking about things like content warnings, which is like where the text of a forum post perhaps gets blurred, and you can choose to opt in with enough warning. That's something that we've developed as an industry for all kinds of reasons, but actually has a very specific application for youth. So I think the first thing is to look at interventions we already have and how those sort of work within youth, or sort of youth usage.
One thing that was striking today already in the workshop was, we have a set of trust and safety TNS professionals here in the audience who have been very thoughtful about how their organizations could engage more, address some of these issues. How do we think as policymakers about, how do we empower trust and safety professionals within companies, within organizations, to get some of those suggestions in place or concrete actions in place?
Yeah, I think one way is, it sounds very basic, but you can ask, and it's not actually as straightforward as that, right? You obviously talk to a lot of people within these companies already, but something that I think many of us would like to see is more questions from in those rooms about like, well, okay, this is the company position. Well, how did you arrive at that decision? What are the trade-offs that you considered in making this choice? Because it's usually, made for a reason, but you as the policymakers may want to understand what were all those factors and, what did the trust and safety team say about this?
It's a great point, and I think interesting because it's clear that there's a lot of research being done within companies, a lot of nuanced thinking within companies. It doesn't always translate into the practices, and we know that it's complicated. Companies are businesses ultimately, but so it's interesting to think about how we can empower more of this thinking within companies. But in terms of we've had now a half a day of a session here. We've heard a lot, especially from the youth representatives, who I think were incredibly articulate to lead us off this morning. What are your reflections so far?
I think a few things. One was they talked a lot about just the positive benefits that they want to be able to get from using social media without this being sucked in effect, and we talked a lot about that in the workshop as well. I think the thing that I was personally struck by was they kept returning to this idea of unrealistic standards. I obviously was a teen girl growing up in Silicon Valley. That was really before, certainly social media and apps and things like that, but I know that was something I struggled with as a child and as a young person, even before all of that and even before AI. And I think I was reflecting a lot during lunch just about how we are all about to see those that level of difficulty change, I think. The last thing I would reflect on is one of the panelists shared that an adverse experience that they had was watching the impact of misinformation online spread throughout their community. And there I was reflecting on how, that obviously impacted the youth panel, but that impacts everybody. And I think often it's tempting to sort of separate these issues out as like, this is a youth safety issue and this is a general trust and safety issue. But in fact, they're so intertwined. And it's really interesting to reflect on those larger issues as, how do they impact youth in particular or disproportionately, and how are youth perhaps sort of leading us into some interesting solutions for overall problems. But now I'm going to ask you, because you just spent, 10 minutes is a lot of time asking me questions. I'm supposed to be interviewing you. You also got to see this panel. What were your reflections?
Fair. So a couple of different things. One is it's really striking how sophisticated young people are in thinking about these issues. I think as a parent, as somebody who works in the space, it's sometimes easy to have a kind of stylized view of the kids today. Do they really care about their privacy? Do they really think about these things? I think we saw in a very clear way, in a very striking way, that there are young people out there who are thinking in a very careful and sophisticated way about the challenges that they face online. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from them. A second big thing was the word nuance, which we both used and I think has come up a lot, came up a lot this morning, which is that it's not one thing or the other, right? It's not all good, it's not all bad. There are a lot of, it's complicated, to use the term. And I think it became very clear in this that we need to bring that nuance. I think the young people we heard from this morning were very clear with us that we need to bring that nuance to this conversation as policymakers, as professionals in the space. And the third thing that really struck me was, I come back to this, I mentioned this idea of thriving online, and it was really reflected in the comments that we heard. This idea that I think we've had in the past, again, maybe it's dated, but for a long time I think we often said, we just need to keep these kids off these devices a little bit longer, or we just need to tell them to use these services less. They're just spending too much time online. I think we heard in a very clear way from people today, from the young people today, that they want to use these services, and we know from parents and caregivers that they want their children to be using these services. It's not about keeping them away. It's not about saying you can't use them. And we heard very eloquently how important these services are for connection, for building community, for staying, for learning. And I think it's really something that we need to take to heart, which is we're not going to solve this problem by shielding young people from being online or from these services. It's about how do we build a better internet, how do we build better services that are going to serve them well.
Yeah. One of the questions I have for you is how the task force is thinking about balancing a trade-off. So I'd love to talk to you about it. In the field, we know that there is a lot of research, something we talked about earlier today, but that the research is often conflicting or it's not that clear exactly what we should do in any case. So how is the task force thinking about balancing the clear need for action with the fact that we also do need more research? There's this complex sort of ecosystem.
Well, I think what we've heard today and the way we're approaching this is we need to do both, right? We need to bring nuance and sophistication to this conversation, and we know that there are big gaps in research. So we need to set a research agenda. We need to think about how we get resources to that agenda, what kind of infrastructure we need in terms of data and transparency that will support better research and understanding in the space. We need to learn from what's gone before. There's a lot of good work out there. There's a lot of good work internationally out there, and that's something I think we expect to think about as well. At the same time, we feel the fierce urgency of the moment, right? I think we've heard it today. We hear it when we're out in the world, that families and parents feel that they need solutions that they are not getting right now. And it's just a symptom of where we are. And so I think we in the task force feel that urgency as well. And I think one really fruitful area where I think we'll lean in is this question about what can companies do? And what are the best practices that are out there now that we can lift up? Because I think we've heard very clearly this can't just be on kids and caregivers anymore. This has to be about how we build collectively better services, better platforms for them to use.
Great. Well, my last question for you is what can we expect from the task force going forward? So where are you headed with these recommendations? If you can give us like a little bit of a spoiler alert here.
I don't want to get ahead of our task force. We have a really great group. We do have our recommendations we're planning to put out our recommendations by the end of the spring, so we've got a few more months to go. So I really don't want to get ahead of the group and its deliberations, but I think you've gotten a flavor already from hearing Assistant Secretary DELPHIN-RITTMON that we're interested in the research agenda, and we'll be focusing on where the holes are there. We do believe there are some really great best practices out there, so we'll be lifting those up. We want to see more industry coordination in this space, and so I'm always encouraged to see when professionals are getting together to think about these things, when coalitions come together, and there are the tech coalition, other coalitions out there to fight some of the bad behaviors out there to kind of build up better practices. I said before, but I think caregivers are looking for a simpler set of solutions out there, and that's another area where I think you'll see us leaning in and thinking about how do we make this these tools that you can use, that people can use. And the last thing is I think we've been asked to think about policy responses. Folks may have heard this in the State of the Union address this year. Just a couple weeks, was that last week? Yes, the president said that we need to pass bipartisan privacy legislation to protect our children online. And there is a strongly held view within this administration that, first of all, passing privacy legislation, comprehensive privacy legislation would help, but that we need to be doing more at the policy level to be helping our youth thrive online. And so I think that will be part of what we have to, in our report. So there's a lot to fill in the blanks there. We've got a lot of work to do as a task force. One of the great things about this task force is an incredible set of colleagues who come from all different disciplines within the federal government. And we are, though, united by this feeling of the urgency of the moment and the fact that the current status quo won't hold. And it's time for us all to step up as a community and think about how we make sure that children thrive online, our young people thrive online. So I'm great to be here today, and we appreciate our hosts here and the community of people who've come together in goodwill to just to try to solve these problems.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. Great to be here.